Carry a song of joy in your heart, and may we all be one. Thank you, and good night.
Turn around, and then there's maybe a 15-20 minute flight, what I would call a flight process, in which we moved through a jump gate at some point and then popped out of it at some point, and then the pilot says, "Welcome to Mars, we'll be landing shortly." And all I could really think of was, what? I mean, what? Mars? What? Yeah, I mean, it was just shocking to kind of hear that, but at the same time, you're in a transport ship with thousands of other personnel going there too. Well, I mean, basically we hit the ground and everyone's starting to disembark, and I think what I was imagining as we're starting to disembark is that, we were going to be maybe in another hangar, like the one we left. We have a very large underground hangar in the moon, the one that we left, and I thought, oh, maybe that's what we did. We parked in another one of those, but that's not what happened. We actually just landed right on the tarmac. And so as we got out towards the gate, and everyone was going down the gangplank, it was clear that they were going outside. They were not going into a hangar. And as I'm watching people going out into the sunlight and into outside, I'm like, wait a minute. Is this okay? Can we do this? We don't have spacesuits. All I could really do was just kind of mumble to myself, kind of maybe to somebody standing next to me, is this okay? Are we going to be all right? Like, not like the guy next to me knows any better than I do, but, what else are you going to do but verbalize that? And you're just being pushed, go, 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 go. So, and then as I walked down the gangplank, hit the tarmac, felt sunlight, cold breeze, thin, dry air as I took a breath. It's thin. I mean, it's like a mountain environment. Right. It's like a high altitude environment.
Stepping off the transport ship, the first thing it actually smelled like was hot asphalt in the sun, because the tarmac was in the hot sun, and asphalt in the sun has a certain smell to it. But the background smell, which is I think what you're asking for, the background smell on Mars is rust. And so if you've ever walked into like somebody's old shop where there's a bunch of rusty metal parts, or an old factory that's got a bunch of rusted metal around it, and you smell like that smell of strong rust in the air, that's mostly what it smells like. Dry, thin mountain air that's inside an old factory. Mostly blue. It's mostly blue. Now, farther up north, it can change color, which I have talked about this, and people have given me crap for it being, black at times, and being blue at times, and being, purple sunsets, and, it can be weird colors up north, but there is not a red sky like the filters show on the probes and the rovers and stuff, but the sky is mostly blue. And then when we got off at Ares Primus there, which is pretty much in the equatorial region, so it's fairly, it looked like a normal blue sky. I was weirded out, like, welcome to Mars. And I'm like, what? This looks like Texas. It was a little odd at first, but not that different from here. When you get there, you breathe in the air, you're looking at the sky. That is one of the first things that you notice. It's just not that different from here.
The first couple of German seed colonies that actually made it on Mars were within the first 20 degrees of the polar regions. There was one in particular that they used that the ICC used to expand and build off of. And this one was somewhat in a canyon area, into the side of a canyon, and advanced in and was under the surface of Mars, not on the surface. The northern hemisphere was where the first main base, that was a German name, was in the beginning, which was built out. And it was built out in a huge way. It was built out to contain a large amount of engineers and scientists, And also, it was also a little ways away, a industrial complex was built where they were going to start producing the items that they needed, technology that they needed, that came from raw materials they mined on Mars, moons, and in the asteroid belt. They took these raw materials, turned them into usable materials, and even composites, and created what they needed in these rather small plants in the beginning. So in the beginning, they were just building what was needed to expand their infrastructure on Mars. These raw materials were taken to the Mars industrial areas on further away from the colonies, and converted into usable materials, whether they be melted down into certain metals that were put into dyes or forms, or converted into composite materials.
It was basically inside a mountain. As we approached it, there was like, wow, that's a big mountain. It's like, that's your new home. And as we got closer and closer, there were two very, very large steel or alloy steel, whatever, doors that would open up. And when I say big steel doors, these doors were probably 40 feet high, 60 feet wide, two of them that would slide open, and probably 20 feet thick. And when they would fully open, they had explosive bolts that could fire the doors slam shut. So if the doors were open, they didn't have to, if like someone was about to come in, they could fire the explosive bolts and the doors would literally slam shut, and anyone who was in the door would be crushed between, 30-foot steel 40 by 60 giant doors. So it was a very interesting system, but that was what we call sort of the motor pool hangar bay, which was where we kept most of the vehicles. And when we were deployed back from the barracks and we would come forward, that was where we would deploy from. So basically it was a mountain, big mountain, and our station, forward station Zebra, was inside, and then about a mile, if you're looking at the mountain to the left, about a mile through the mountain would be our sister station. So there was the two division. We were division 096, they were division 097, but that's how many soldiers we had. There's 16 squads of 16 each. You got 4 fire teams of 4 and 4 squad leaders, and the alpha team squad leaders also, fire team leaders also your squad leader.
You might think that you're in some sort of naval facility or something. The living quarter areas are all labeled in alphanumeric. It looks very, very much like a military installation. There was one place that we went that they had to fix a damaged piece of equipment that was essential, that the ICC couldn't get their personnel to in a manageable amount of time. And we were escorted told not to make eye contact with anybody, not to talk to anybody, that whole thing. And there was a wall where people were like hanging art. And so it seemed, that was the only thing. It looked like they were doing some things for the mental health of people, to make them not totally depressed and suicidal. But the people looked gaunt, pale, and just almost like drones, just going about their day.
We lived in an underground base, so I spent a lot of my time underground, but the time that we spent above ground was certainly in an environment suit, a powered body armor environment suit, which protects you from the environment. It does have a thin, breathable atmosphere, about 700 millibars or something like that. So it's thin, like you're kind of breathing mountain air, but it's breathable. It's doable. You can't really hang out in it and survive in it for long, I think, without an environment suit. But You know, there are places in the equatorial region where it's a bit warmer, and I've been told people can, you know, kind of walk around on the surface in, you know, what would be considered street clothes. The gravity is a bit less, so, you know, you got a bit more spring in your step, and in a powered body suit, you got a lot of spring in your step. There's definitely like ground diggers, little reptiles, little mammals, little ground birds, and shrubs, and I mean, there's definitely life that's around. It's just more like, you know, desert life. A lot of it, it's fairly sparse. I've never been to places where there's, you know, forests or patches of trees, but I've been told that there are such places. So not having been given a briefing when I was there by a zoologist on life on Mars, I can only tell you sort of what my experience of what I saw and what we interacted with on a personal basis, which was pretty simple, kind of smaller critters and a couple of indigenous species who were a bit larger. Absolutely. There is, and because it's often chilly and cold, and we spent most of my time where I was at and towards the northern polar regions, not so much the North Pole, but like, you know, Canada, you know, like more like halfway. So it was definitely cooler where we were at. And it would occasionally snow. It would occasionally snow, dust, you know, on the ground, which is definitely moisture. But I will also say that with the lower gravitational coefficient on Mars, snowfall falls even slower. So that sort of slow falling snow effect becomes this even slower, slow motion snow falling effect, which is really quite surreal, quite beautiful. But the first time it happened, it was really out of place, and we were on a little patrol and started this snow coming down really, it was coming down so slowly, you know, we could see it coming up above us from the sky, going, when is that coming down? And as it started to drift down, we could see that it was snowflakes, but it was moving in such slow motion because there's this lesser gravity. It was really incredible to see. Really surreal experience.
It's way more habitable on the surface outside without an environment suit or anything else in the equatorial region in the middle than definitely towards the upper, you know, polar regions, which is where we spent most of our time, which was, you know, what I would say Alaska. I mean, you know, like it's sort of that mid, you know, almost up to the Arctic Circle up there, but not quite. So, I mean, we were really high up north, and it was very cold up there most of the year. And you could not survive out there most of the time without an environment suit. So we never went outside without environment suits. Sometimes you could pop your bubble up and you could breathe the thin air out there. But you couldn't just, you know, hey, I'm gonna pop out of my suit and get some fresh air. No, it's too cold. One middle of the winter, and I had a suit breach that came open, and I nearly froze to death. It was horrible. It's still so cold temperatures can still be horribly traumatic for me, because all of a sudden I start to feel that shaking. Oh my God, I'm gonna get hypothermia and die, and it's horrible. It can be even colder, but I can say it would also be warmer than the Arctic. This is sort of the interesting thing about this. It can be a really wide variance of temperature, which is some of the reasons why you still don't want to necessarily live on the surface. There are animals and critters that do, but most of them live underground. They burrow, they live in caves, they dig into the ground and so forth. There's not too many critters that, you know, birds that just live in nests in trees or something like that. That's just not a very habitable zone for them. Like little tweety birds, little like finches. I mean, they look like little finches, swallows. I mean, you know, I've seen both, you know, a fantail and forktail, you know, little birds, like I would call them, little ground birds, all kinds of regular things, little gopher, rodent, squirrel, whatever they are. I mean, things like that, little snakes and lizards, and oh yeah, sure, bugs. Now, I've heard people talk about bigger animals, bigger lizards and things like that.
Spiders and all that stuff.
Yeah, but again, that's got to be more down towards the equatorial region where they can survive on the surface and stuff like that and hunt. I mean, up north, most of what we saw were small things, us and the other indigenous species that lived up there that had technology and civilization to live up there. Not a lot of wildlife.
Well, I mean, it was 256 soldiers, but the support personnel was probably about another 80 or 90 personnel, maybe now probably almost another 100 personnel. So it was probably maybe 350, a little over 350 on that facility. Yes, it was. In fact, that was what it was called, Forward Station Zebra. So it was called a forward station. But yeah, that was Forward Station Zebra was absolutely the most northern forward operating base that we had. No question. There was nobody out in front of us, ahead of us. That was it. There was nobody farther north. Everyone was down below and was behind us.
There are lava tubes that are like 10 times the size of the lava tubes we have here, and they are perfect for sealing and creating an environment on the inside, and you have an easy ready-made base. And that is a very highly coveted area to create bases. Huge, bigger, they dwarf any of the caverns or the tubes that we have here. It has to do with the size of the volcano, the gravity, the barometric pressure on Mars, and the way that, how come they're so huge. There are millions of beings in these lava tubes, just living out their life cycles there.